22 years have gone by, but Friday Night Lights still feels perfectly untouched. It is like a time capsule holding an entire slice of the American South from the 2000s. But here is the interesting paradox. The movie froze time, but the cast could not fight time itself. 22 years later, they did not just get older. They did not just get older, they got older in ways we never saw coming. One man lived through 6 marriages. One man got beaten down by alcohol and major surgery. Another left far too soon, and the story he left behind is enough to catch in your throat. Let's look at those faces 22 years later. And make sure you stay till the end, because the last 5 facts get even crazier, like Amber Heard and even the first nude scene of a career. Number 1, Billy Bob Thornton as Gary Gaines. Before he became Gary Gaines, Billy Bob Thornton was already a man life had beaten all to hell. Born in 1955 in Hot Springs, Arkansas, he stepped into Friday Night Lights in 2004 at 49, which means he was no longer some young actor out chasing a break, but a man who had already held an Oscar in his hands for Sling Blade. If you want to understand why this role carried so much weight, you have to look straight at Billy Bob Thornton's life. He grew up poor, struggled with dyslexia from childhood, and has said very plainly that his father abused him both physically and emotionally. That was not the kind of childhood story you'd tell just to make people sad. That was the kind of thing that stayed with him all the way into adulthood, then settled into the way he talks, the way he goes quiet, and the way he can make a line sound like a confession. Thornton's personal life after that was not peaceful either. 6 marriages tells you all by itself that this was a love life full of fractures. His marriage to Angelina Jolie turned him into tabloid obsession in the early 2000s with that story about the two of them wearing pendants with a drop of each other's blood inside, something America would not stop talking about back then. Darker still was the divorce from Pietra Dawn Cherniak, with abuse allegations on her side and denials on Thornton's. Then there was the legal tragedy involving his oldest daughter, Amanda Brumfield, a wound deep enough to show that his life was not just messy because of the tabloids. What is worth talking about is that Billy Bob Thornton did not fall apart after all that wreckage. He kept going. He himself said Connie England was the one who pulled him out of the ditch, and later in life he finally seems to have found something solid to lean on. This year he is 71, still landing leading roles, still making music with the Boxmasters, and still talking about Friday Night Lights, like it was one of the most real memories of his career. Billy Bob. I still believe Gary Gaines lives on, not because you played him better than everybody else, but because you brought a whole damaged life into that role, and the audience saw it right away. Number 2, Derek Luke as James Boobie Miles. Boobie Miles
you really
loses
can't
everything
play with
faster
this
than
kind of
anybody
music.
else
I
in
can't
Friday
play.
Night
I'm
Lights.
gonna play.
One injury.
I'm ready
and the
to
whole
play.
town
What
of
I want
Odessa
is for you
My
to be able
team
to crack
needs me.
apart.
and Derek Luke is the one who had to carry that entire fall on screen. Born in 1974, Derek Luke came to this movie at 30 after already making a big impact with his first major role in Antoine Fisher, the role that won him an Independent Spirit Award. That means he was no longer walking into the film as an unknown face, but he also was not yet the kind of star Hollywood had already cleared the road for. What makes Boobie Miles stick in the audience's memory for so long is not just football. It is the fact that this is a young man who believed his whole life had already been set by his talent on the field, then everything gets cut off in a split second. Derek Luke also had a very rare advantage. He was not just playing a real person. The real James Boobie Miles also showed up in the movie several times, standing right there beside him. That makes the role feel heavier than a normal reenactment. If you want to understand why Derek Luke pulled that off, you have to look at his road getting there. The Los Angeles Times once wrote that he came to California with about $1,000, worked in a store on the Sony lot, read the trade papers right there where he was selling things, then clawed his way forward step by step to hang on to opportunity. That is not the story of a guy who got lifted up. That is the story of somebody standing right in the middle of Hollywood and still having to prove he belonged there. In interviews in 2004, Luke also said Peter Berg kept pushing him farther emotionally every single day on set, even when the character was just standing off to the side of the field. Derek Luke's personal life, though, went in almost the exact opposite direction from his most famous role. No major tabloid storm to speak of, no string of scandals big enough to swallow his career whole. Instead, he has had a steady marriage with Sophia Adela Luke, a woman he has called his rock, and his reason more than once even saying, flat out, that for him, divorce is not an option. Derek Luke is not the kind of actor who lives off drama. What is admirable about him is that after a low starting point and an early breakout, he still managed to build a really steady career, from Glory Road to 13 Reasons Why and The Crossover. This year, Derek Luke is 52, still working, still free of ugly headlines, and that makes me appreciate him even more. Boobie Miles never got a second chance, but Derek Luke built one for himself with his own hands. Number 3, Lucas Black as Mike Winchell. Mike Winchell was not the loudest player in the movie. He was the one getting crushed hardest by pressure. Lucas Black was born in 1982 in Alabama, and when Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, he was just 22. What matters here is that Lucas was not the kind of city actor learning how to fake a Southern accent or learning how to hold a football the right way. He grew up in Speak, Alabama, really played football in school, and got into acting young, even without formal training at the beginning. That is why Mike Winchell in Lucas Black's hands feels so real, so close to the kind of Southern kid forced to grow up too soon. After this movie, Lucas Black took a pretty steady road. He had Jarhead, then The Fast, and the furious Tokyo Drift, then 42, and a lot of years on NCIS New Orleans. He never turned into the kind of Hollywood megastar blowing up the papers every week, but that is exactly why Lucas Black's career ended up having a kind of solidness not every former child star manages to keep. With him, the appeal was never about scandal. It was about the fact that he always kept the image of a plain-spoken Southern man who never showed off and never let fame pull him off course. The most interesting part of Lucas Black's personal life was not scandal, but a decision that felt very grown man. He once said there was a stretch where he was working around 70 hours a week, leaving when his kids were still asleep and coming home when they were almost ready to sleep again. That was when he realized success was starting to cost too much. Lucas left NCIS New Orleans not because he had run out of road, but because he did not want his career to take away his role as a husband and father. This year at 44, he is still acting, but clearly living slower, putting faith and family at the center. Number 4, Garrett Hedlund as Don Billingsley. Don Billingsley was not the most rebellious kid in the movie. He was the son whose youth got twisted by his own father. Garrett Hedlund was born in 1984, and when Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, he was only 20. What matters is that Garrett came from a farm in Minnesota, played all kinds of sports, then moved to Los Angeles, and almost walked straight into Hollywood with his first 2 movies in the same year, Troy and Friday Night Lights. A 20-year-old kid having to carry a father-son relationship that heavy on screen that is not an easy role to swallow. Don Billingsley is memorable because he is not just under football pressure. He is also living under the shadow of Charles Billingsley, the drunk, bitter father who used to be one of Permian's old heroes and now dumps every failure of his own life onto his son. Reviews from 2004 up to now still treat this as one of the most painful threads in the film because Don is getting crushed not by the team on the other side of the field, but by his own father sitting in the stands. Garrett Hedlund gives the role real force because he holds onto exactly the right energy of a young guy who is cocky, angry, and desperate to be seen, to the point he is almost destroying himself. In real life, Garrett Hedlund did not exactly travel in a straight line either. After all those promising years with Four Brothers Tron Legacy and Mudbound, he slipped hard in the early 2000s. People reported that in his DUI case in 2020, his blood alcohol level was recorded at 0.364 times the legal limit. After that, he completed 30 days of inpatient treatment and several months of counseling. But by 2022, he was arrested again for public intoxication, right when things with Emma Roberts were falling apart. What makes me still want to keep watching Garrett is not the fall itself, but the fact that he did not disappear after it. This year he is 42, still working, still showing up in Tulsa King and learning how to live as a co-parent after the breakup. Don Billingsley grew up with a father who ruined his youth. Garrett Hedlund, in real life, ruined more than a few things himself, but at least he still has a chance to build it back. Number 5, Jay Hernandez as Brian Chavez. Jay was born in 1978, and when Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, he was 26, old enough not to disappear inside a crowded cast, but still young enough to keep that look of a guy with his whole future still sitting right in front of him. He grew up in Montebello, California, a first-generation Mexican-American, and got into acting after a chance encounter in an elevator in Los Angeles when manager Howard Tyner spotted him and decided to put him in acting classes. What makes Brian Chavez memorable is that he does not see football as the only ticket his life has. Jay himself once said Brian was the only one in the group who looked beyond the field thinking about school and about doing something bigger outside Odessa. That detail was not something the writers just made up to sound good. The real-life Brian Chavez was one of the central figures in the original story, then went to Harvard and later studied law at Texas Tech. Jay Hernandez's real life is interesting in a much quieter way. When Crazy/Beautiful brought him into the spotlight in 2001, the manager who had also guided him into the business died of a heart attack right when all of Hollywood was starting to expect big things from this new Latino face. Jay did not fall apart after that loss. He kept going with Hostel, World Trade Center, Suicide Squad, then held the lead in Magnum PY all the way to 2024. This year, Jay is 48. His marriage to Daniela Deutscher is still strong since 2006, and he has also stepped into a new chapter with his first feature as a director, Night Comes. Jay Hernandez does not give people loud drama. He gives them something rarer in Hollywood: steadiness, privacy, and enough good sense not to let Hollywood swallow him whole. Number 6, Tim McGraw as Charles Billingsley. Charles Billingsley does not need to step onto the field to make people afraid. The second he opens his mouth, Don's youth starts shrinking. Tim McGraw was born in 1967, and when Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, he was 37, already a country superstar before audiences realized he could handle a role this heavy. Charles Billingsley is not your standard strict father. He is a former high school hero trapped in the past, living off an old championship ring, drinking, humiliating his son, and turning Don Billingsley's youth into a place that never feels safe. What makes the role memorable is that Tim McGraw does not play him like some flat villain. He makes Charles both hateful and sad, like this is a man who has lived way too long off the one winning memory of his life. And in real life, Tim has gone through enough for audiences to believe that weight. He quit drinking in 2008 after his friends started getting worried. Before that, he used to drink before every show to calm his nerves. The past few years have been even rougher. Multiple back surgeries, knee replacement, shoulder injuries, and disc problems, to the point that in 2025 he admitted there were moments when he thought he might have to stop his career. But unlike Charles Billingsley, Tim McGraw in real life still kept the very thing that character ruined a strong family with Faith Hill since 1996 and their 3 daughters. This year, he is 59, and he is still standing there. Number 7, Connie Britton as Sharon Gaines. Sharon Gaines moves through Friday Night Lights pretty quietly. Connie Britton's real life, though, was not easy at all. Connie was born in 1967, and when the movie came out in 2004, she was 37. In the film version, she played Sharon Gaines' coach Gary Gaines' wife. But Connie herself later admitted that her part in the movie was pretty small, and by the time the movie came out, most of what she shot had been left on the cutting room floor. That matters more than it sounds, because when Peter Berg came back with the idea of making a Friday Night Lights series, Connie said no several times. She did not want to keep playing the kind of wife standing off to the edge of a football story. It was only when she was promised that the TV version would give the female character a fuller life that she agreed, and from there she created Tommy Taylor, one of the most unforgettable wives American television has ever had. Connie Britton's life has carried more weight than her career. She married John Britton in 1991, then divorced in 1995. In 2011, she adopted Ayob from Ethiopia as a single mother. 1 year later, she moved to Nashville to start the series Nashville, knowing nobody there, raising a small child while also working 16 to 18 hours a day. Connie herself called that stretch crisis mode, and hearing that is enough to understand how hard she had to hold herself together. This year, Connie is 59, still acting, and got engaged to David Windsor in 2025. Number 8, Lee Thompson Young as Chris Comer. Lee Thompson Young should have had more time than that. When Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, he was only 20, but To American audiences, that face had already been familiar for years because of the famous Jet Jackson on Disney Channel. In the movie, Lee played Chris Comer Permian's backup running back. What makes Lee Thompson Young's story hit so much harder was what happened off-screen. He got famous too early, grew up under the lights too early, and still kept working steadily after his Disney years were behind him, from Friday Night Lights to Aquila and the B. Smallville and Rizzoli and Isles. But later his family said very clearly that Lee had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his late teens. That was the part of his life the audience almost never saw. On the outside, he was still a handsome young actor professional moving forward. On the inside, he was carrying a battle a lot of people around him could never fully understand. In August 2013, Lee died at his home in Los Angeles at just 29. The thing I respect most about this story is that Lee Thompson Young's family did not let it get buried in silence. They spoke publicly about mental illness, then created the Lee Thompson Young Foundation to fight stigma and help people recognize the signs loved ones so often miss. Number 9. Lee Jackson as Ivory Christian. Lee Jackson was not the most famous person in this cast, but his life may have been one of the heaviest. When Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, Jackson was 24, a former player for Longview and the Texas Longhorns, not some actor. Climbing rung by rung in Hollywood, he played Ivory Christian, or preacher man, the kind of player who does not say much but carries real weight. Jackson's childhood was anything but easy. He grew up in a broken home, watched his mother struggle with drugs overdose, get beaten by dealers, then disappear for months at a time, to the point that her little boy had no idea whether she was even still alive. Then in college, right when he thought she had gotten better, Jackson saw her walk out of a crack house with his own eyes. He said himself that was the moment he hit rock bottom, and even tried to end his life before faith pulled him back. That fall was heavy enough to ruin a lot of people. Lee Jackson did not stop there. After the movie, he tried living the Hollywood life, but a divorce and the writer's strike in 2007 slowed everything down. Jackson did modeling, then went back to Texas to work for Coca-Cola, before realizing the place he really belonged was the classroom and the high school football field. This year, he is 46, a teacher and coach at Tyler Legacy, showing Friday Night Lights to his students, then telling them about the road he took to get there. Number 10, Grover Coulson as L.V. Miles. L.V. Miles was not the man who talked the most in the movie, but every time he spoke, you could hear a whole life worn down by Texas football. Grover Coulson was born in 1947 in Hubbard, Texas, and when Friday Night Lights came out in 2004, he was 57. He did not enter the business in some flashy way. Grover studied theater at Tarrant County Junior College, paused for 2 years to serve in the military, then came back and kept pursuing acting. After a stage performance at Hip Pocket Theater, he got noticed by an agent, and on his very first television audition, he landed a role on Dallas. That is the kind of beginning that feels very Texas, very old school, and very real. In Friday Night Lights, Grover played L.V. Miles, the uncle who raised Boobie Miles. It is not a long role, but it lands right in the most painful part of the story. Roger Ebert pointed out clearly that L.V. is the one who takes Boobie for the MRI after the injury, while Variety noted that Grover did a whole lot with only a few brief moments. That sounds right, because L.V. is the kind of grown man in the movie who does not need to yell for the audience to understand how stuck he is between the love he has for the nephew he raised and the football obsession of the whole town. Grover Coulson's public life never had any major scandals, but honestly, that is exactly what makes him memorable. This is a man who worked the kind of career that was quiet but steady, from local theater to The Lone Ranger, Better Call Saul. A ghost story, and then still showing up in Landman when he was pushing 80. In 2025, he even left a public comment to the Texas legislature saying he was a local actor who needed opportunities to keep making a living right there at home. That is pretty interesting. Number 11, Julius Tennon as Coach James. Julius Tennon did not step into Friday Night Lights as an actor learning how to play a coach. He had been a real football player, and his life had already taken some hard turns before he ever got to this movie. Tennon was born in 1953 in Austin, Texas. When the movie came out in 2004, he was 51, and this year he is 73. In the film, He played Coach Freddie James of the Carter Cowboys based on the real-life Freddie James. It is not a long role, but Tennon looks completely at home on that field because he came out of football himself, got a scholarship to the University of Tulsa, then became the first black man to graduate from that school's theater program. Julius Tennon's life is the part that is even more unforgettable. He grew up in tough circumstances, one of 8 siblings, and football once looked like the clearest road out. But a knee injury cut that road off and forced him to turn toward acting. That alone was a major turn, and that was not all. Tennon also spent 17 years as a single father, raising a son and a daughter on his own before he met Viola Davis. Later, he met Viola Davis on the set of City of Angels in 1999, married her in 2003, adopted Genesis in 2011, then built Juvie Productions together with his wife. Number 12, Connie Cooper is Mrs. Winchell. Connie Cooper does not have the kind of Hollywood life tabloids chase after. What she does have is a stage life long enough that she never needed noise to hold her ground on screen. With Connie Cooper, I need to be clear about one thing to keep this story clean. The public records I could verify do not list a birth year, so I am not putting an age in here. But the rest is pretty solid. Connie has a bachelor's and a master's in theater from Northwestern University, worked steadily in theater in Chicago and Houston from 1972 to 1987, then moved into film starting in 1987 and kept a very steady career going for decades. Alongside acting, she also worked as an acting coach, splitting her time between Houston and Los Angeles. The most interesting thing about Connie Cooper is the quiet part of her life. No scandal, no tabloid collapse, no easy clickbait story. Instead, what you get is a long, quiet, very real working life, from Goodman Theater and Stage's repertory to film and television, and then still standing on stage and driving Miss Daisy in Houston in 2021. Number 13. Amber Heard as Maria. Maria only slips through Friday Night Lights for a few moments, but Amber Heard's life went through a storm Hollywood still has not forgotten. Amber was born in 1986 in Austin, Texas, and when the movie came out in 2004, she was 18. This was one of her first movie roles, a very small part in a very male, very Texas film, and back then nobody knew that face would go on to become one of the most divisive names in Hollywood 2 decades later. The most memorable thing about Amber Heard on this list is not how much screen time Maria got. It is that weird feeling you get looking back at Friday Night Lights and suddenly realizing she was there right at the starting line of a career that would turn into something so volatile. After this movie, Amber Heard slowly stepped into the spotlight with Never Back Down, Pineapple Express, and later Mera in the Aquaman world. But it was her private life that swallowed her public image whole. Her marriage to Johnny Depp, 2 defamation trials in England and the United States. Then the verdict in 2022 turned Heard into the center of a media storm that very few actresses of her generation have ever had to carry. A P made it clear that both sides settled and ended the appeals in December 2022. After that, people reported that Heard left California, lived more quietly in Madrid, and by 2025, she was raising 3 children in Spain. And if you are still here with me, then I have 5 really memorable behind-the-scenes details before we close out Friday Night Lights. These are not giant things that change the whole movie, but they are the kind of details that make you appreciate just how carefully this movie was made. Fact 1. Garrett Hedlund really did bulk up for Don Billingsley. For Friday Night Lights alone, he put on about 9 kilos. And that still was not all of it. Before that, Garrett had already put on around 18 kilos for another movie in the same year. At one point, he got up to around 90 kilos. That is why Don Billingsley feels so solid, heavy, and stubborn on screen. Garrett did not come into this movie just to stand there and look good in the frame. Fact 2. Peter Berg really hates anything that sounds fake. When he felt a few actors playing assistant coaches did not sound enough like real Texas football guys, he did something very simple. He brought in actual Permian coaches to read lines in some of the game scenes. I love that detail because it says everything about the spirit of this movie. Berg did not want football in the film to sound like Hollywood football. He wanted it to sound like what people really yell at each other from the sideline in Texas. Fact 3. This is the detail where the movie and real life touch each other in a really obvious way. The real James Boobie Miles shows up several times in the film, standing right next to Derek Luke, the man playing him. So next time you watch it again and pay close attention, you may spot him in a Permian jacket and black cap. Just the fact that the real man is standing next to the actor playing his life is enough to make Boobie's role in the movie feel a whole lot heavier. Fact 4. This one is pretty interesting. Looking at Derek Luke and Lee Thompson Young on screen, you could easily think both of them had been playing ball since they were kids, but before they joined this movie, neither one had ever played football professionally. That really shows how hard the cast had to train to make everything look that natural on screen. And with a sports movie that always matters, when actors do it well enough, you stop seeing actors. You just see players. Fact 5. And here's the detail that makes a whole lot of people pause for a second when they go back and watch it. Friday Night Lights was one of Amber Heard's early appearances on the big screen back when she was still at a very early stage of her career. She is Texas-born and raised from Austin, so her presence in this movie feels even more right for that West Texas atmosphere the film has. Maria is not a big role, but it comes with a pretty bold moment. The kind of scene where the audience instantly gets that the movie put Amber Heard in a very revealing on-screen moment right from her first steps into film. So when you look back at Friday Night Lights now, you do not just see an old football movie. You also see a few faces when they were still taking their very first steps in the business. Looking back at Friday Night Lights today, what stays with me is not just how different those faces look now compared with then. What stays with me is the feeling that this movie still holds on to the soul of a very real America, very Southern, very early 2000s. That is why then and now, videos like this always carry their own weight. They do not just show us what time did to the cast, they also remind us what time did to us. What about you? Which face in the cast surprised you the most and does? Friday Night Lights bring back some chapter of your own life. Tell me in the comments. Share this video with somebody else who used to love the movie too, and do not forget to subscribe to Weird Movie Secrets so we can keep going back to memories like these.